I am the executive director of our honor, and we support and empower veterinary professionals to obey their conscience and work for more ethical systems. I'm also on the board of LEAP, which stands for Leaders for Ethics, Animals, and the Planet. And we teach kids about how to care for farmed animals through farm animal sanctuaries. I'm also on the founding committee of Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. We are live streaming. Does anybody have a problem with that? So we're recording this so that people can watch later. So, but yeah, I grew up in rural Northern California. I was in 4-H. I was the vice president of my 4-H club. I raised goats, chickens, and spent most of my free time riding and training horses, and I competed in dressage, 3-day eventing, hunter jumper, reining, endurance. This is an off-the-track thoroughbred named Lucy that I trained up to pre-St. George level dressage. In 4-H, we were taught that being a steward of animals, whether animals raised for food, fiber, or sport, comes with responsibilities. That means you have to provide them with food, shelter, water, and when the time comes, a quick and painless death. But today, we're going to talk about depopulation, and it's a relatively new and somewhat troubling practice that has come about because we now raise animals in such large numbers that we producers can't ensure that these animals succumb to a quick and painless death during emergencies. So we'll go through why that is and what we can do to maybe change that. But first, this is a new thing. I want to see if this works. Have any of you watched Severance? Do you know the TV show Severance? Oh my God, it's on Apple TV. Yes, cool. You have to watch it because it so applies to veterinary medicine in so many ways. But the screenshot is from the TV show Severance. But I want to see, why are you pursuing a career in veterinary medicine? Let me see if this will work. Has anybody actually filled this out yet? I'm going to present this. It's showing 0 responses. It could be because I did something wrong. But I'll wait a little bit. Has anybody successfully submitted an answer and it's not?
There's a word limit, so I think people are trying to condense their...
Oh, okay. All right. I'll give it some time then. Hello.
It says that it's submitting.
It says it what? It went?
Okay, I think it's submitted.
It's what?
I think it's submitted.
Yeah, it's not showing up on my thing, though. So I'm not sure. So somehow this isn't working. Does anyone care to share why they're pursuing a career in veterinary medicine? Oh, wait, here it is. Now it's showing. Hold on. Let me see if I can show this to you. So some people say helping animals and people, passion, animal lover. Let's see. These are all great answers and reasons for pursuing a career in veterinary medicine. Oh, I love animals. For real, that's why we all get into this, because we love animals and helping people. So this is Dr. Stephanie Fraisel, and she also wanted to pursue a career in veterinary medicine because she loved animals. But during her 2018 clinical year at Auburn Veterinary School, Dr. Freisel and her classmates were to practice surgery on a bull named Fred and then kill him afterwards. She had a panic attack thinking about having to do this to Fred and didn't want to participate. So Fred's people donated him to the school because they didn't want him anymore. And he was older and he was just going to be euthanized. But they were going to do all these surgeries on Fred and then kill him. And she didn't want any part of that, like disfiguring Fred's body before he was to be euthanized. So the faculty scolded her, threatened her with expulsion, and her peers mocked her. And she failed the class. So why did she face such a strong backlash? While this talk is about avian influenza and depopulation, this is a really important concept because it relates to bigger systemic issues, how policies get put into effect, because we have to consider human nature. And there is this human instinct to derogate the do-gooder, like Dr. Stephanie Freisel, and it has profound systemic implications. This paper found that moral reproach, even if it's implied, can sting deeply. Why? Because most people care profoundly about their moral identity. And research shows that we tend to value being seen as good even more than being seen as competent. That's why people often react defensively or even with hostility when they feel morally judged. So Dr. Freisel's classmates and likely professors felt morally judged by her for taking this stance. And here's where it gets really relevant. Those who take these strong ethical stances, what this paper calls morally motivated minorities, can trigger resentment in others. Not because they're wrong, but because their presence alone can feel like a silent challenge to the status quo. So this raises really tough and important questions for veterinarians and people in the veterinary profession. How can we advocate for animal welfare, for the principles like the 3 R's, when human nature itself tends to derogate the do-gooder? How can you go into a hospital or a lab or a farm and say, like, actually, you should be doing things better, when people who do that will be resented by those who are existing in the system? And this is something all new graduates entering into the field experience. Like, oh, we learned in school there's a better way to do this. And then when you tell people the better way, they resent you for it because they feel judged. Like, what are you talking about? We've spent all these years, figuring out the best way to do things. And now you're telling me that there's a better way to do it. So this isn't just a veterinary problem, though. The pressure to become complacent in harm exists in all the healing professions, even in human medicine, where patients have legal rights and protections. Our patients have no legal rights and protections. So this is a powerful essay written by a medical student and explores the moral vulnerabilities that can emerge in medical culture itself. It's well documented that students progress through their training, become less empathetic, not more. The structure of medical education, its hierarchy, its pace, its emotional repression, makes students acutely susceptible to becoming complacent in the face of harm or even actively participating in it. And history shows us what that can look like. Physicians participated in torture at Guantanamo Bay. During Hurricane Katrina, doctors carried out mercy killings. Many medical students were taught to perform pelvic exams on anesthetized women who did not consent. In World War II, 7% of German doctors joined the SS, compared to less than 1% of the general population. In her research, Colini found that most doctors who participated in the Holocaust weren't different from us. They were ordinary people who believed that they were doing something unpleasant but morally necessary. New doctors quickly came to see the horrors of the concentration camps as just how things are. And we think, oh, we've learned from the horrors of Nazi medical experiments, but we haven't. The occasional human sacrifice, Carl Elliott, the author, exposes modern day research scandals including deadly tracheal transplants in the top institutions in 2010, where it took years and multiple deaths before anyone spoke up. Elite institutions often inspire loyalty over ethics. The higher the cost is to get into an organization, the harder people cling to the belief that it was worth it. So the moral is, don't simp for your school, your employer, or any title. Question everything, especially when the stakes are life and death. In Colaini's essay, she explains how in medicine, veterinary medicine, and human medicine alike, we shield ourselves from the full weight of what we're doing through our language. We don't say kill, we say euthanize or sacrifice. And these euphemisms allow us to continue these harmful practices and preserve our sense of moral comfort. And we're trained this sort of detached professionalism, and we're told it helps with burnout, but it also distances us from empathy. And it makes us easier to comply with systems that we might otherwise question. We are socialized to obey, to respect hierarchies, to defer to our professors and our residents and attending clinicians, to trust their judgment, to follow protocol, even when something feels wrong. And we have deep emotional and financial ties to our institutions that trained us. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes in our education, and we depend on these universities for our degrees, our jobs, and our reputations. All of this makes it deeply uncomfortable to name or challenge wrongdoing, especially when it's systemic. So Colaini concludes by saying, as we progress through medical school, perhaps part of leading an ethical life is not allowing one's existing moral compass to be recalibrated by authority and socialization. So the human medical profession is starting to grapple with this and taking multiple steps to address this problem. Unfortunately, the veterinary field is not. The American Veterinary Medical Association is not taking these steps, and we'll go into why that is and evidence of that. The very way that we teach veterinary medicine is hurting students' moral growth. This study found that, unlike other medical fields, veterinary students didn't show the usual increases in moral reasoning over the 4 years of their training. In fact, education may have inhibited that development. When students are required to harm the very patients that the school should help, it doesn't just teach surgery, it teaches moral disconnection. And this is an example Bernard Rowland, who used to teach veterinary ethics at CSU, uses. And he talks about this one vet school class where a student anesthetized a dog, beat the dog with a sledgehammer, and spent the semester repairing the damage. And he got an A for that. Professors defended these labs, saying that students need to be tough, that if they couldn't stomach killing a dog, then they didn't belong in the profession. And components of this exist today, even though this specific thing isn't still being done. Eventually, schools started to see that repeatedly anesthetizing and hurting the same animal and then waking them up to do it all again was unethical. So instead, they had students perform a procedure on an animal and then kill them before they woke up. This was seen as more humane, but many students refused to accept that logic. And conscientious objectors like Dr. Kirsten Rosenberg at UC Davis, Dr. Britton Hammett McCurry at the University of Georgia pushed back and changed their school's policies. But these two schools still do this practice. They just don't do it on dogs. But researchers like Andrew Knight have since shown that students learn just as well, if not better, using humane alternatives. And progress on this didn't come from the top. It came from students and educators who said that there was a better way. But this still is common practice in most veterinary schools, and we're releasing a paper showing just how prevalent it still is. Research shows that students often feel uneasy about doing these terminal labs, but afterwards they justify it by saying, oh, it was a valuable learning experience. So when someone suggests that killing animals for practice isn't necessary, it can trigger a lot of defensiveness. But I never had to kill an animal at UC Davis to learn. Even though UC Davis still does terminal labs, I was a conscientious objector to those. I trained on models and practiced under skilled surgeons and operated on animals who actually needed our help. And now surgery is my favorite part of practice. I spay and neuter over 100 animals a week, and I also teach surgery too. And this is us teaching surgery on animals who need it under the guidance of experienced surgeons. We do this in Mexico. We did this in the Navajo Nation in Arizona and Fiji. So this is a recent article that came out, and it points out that most students, when they are introduced to animals in school, learn on dead animals. Like that's kind of your first introduction, is like the cadaver lab. And this professor in Hungary is changing that. And he says, this is their very first lesson. And the first time should be with a living animal. They shouldn't first meet with a carcass because they want to heal animals. They want to make animals better. But most veterinary schools still treat animals as tools, not individual patients deserving of our compassion. Bradley Miller, the founder of the Humane Farming Association, says, teaching a child not to step on a caterpillar is as valuable to the child as it is to the caterpillar. But what happens when schools do move away from terminal labs? They often face backlash from industry groups and veterinarians and even students. Animal ag publications push this false narrative that students are being denied training by animal rights activists. And unfortunately, some students and instructors believe it. I've talked to students at CSU who genuinely thought that they were missing out, not because it was true, but because that's what they were told. And the American Veterinary Medical Association holds the power to accredit veterinary schools and approve their curriculum. But when experts like Dr. Andrew Knight and Nick Jukes submitted lectures about their research on humane innovations and alternatives to using animals in veterinary education to the AVMA convention, they were denied. Even when science supports change, the gatekeepers aren't always ready to open the door. So who is the AVMA? This is the most powerful force in veterinary medicine. Its Council on Education decides which vet schools get accredited. It sets policies that government agencies follow. It lobbies Congress through its own PAC. And with over 100,000 members, it speaks for nearly every vet in the United States. So when the AVMA makes a move, the whole profession feels it. But who controls the AVMA? Is it the member veterinarians? No. It doesn't seem that way. It's names like Cargill, Merck, Elanco, Boehringer Ingelheim. So these are pharmaceutical companies and large agribusiness giants with a stake in keeping the status quo. So who is the AVMA really serving then? Our patients and our veterinarians, or these corporations? So when violence against animals is normalized, when animals are treated as objects, and students who don't want to harm them are pushed out before they even begin, what kind of profession are we building? Veterinarians become morally vulnerable. And here, I don't know if you know this story, this veterinarian faced public backlash after kicking a horse. This is a Mustang he was trying to geld. Things got really out of hand. He tried to anesthetize the horse, and the horse wasn't responding to the drugs. And the owners filmed this happening. And I'll show the video, but trigger warning, it's kind of graphic. But there's this deeper issue here, and this isn't just one moment of cruelty. This whole system just desensitizes us to it. And a bunch of veterinarians on veterinary Facebook groups called for him to be punished and have his license revoked. But we have to ask, why is the full force of outrage reserved for this one visibly suffering veterinarian who's having a temper tantrum, while those who institutionalize mass harm are protected and rewarded? And now this veterinarian has gone missing. So I'll just play this video here real briefly. This is what happened. Yeah, the horse is down, kicks the horse in the face. Now, there's never any excuse, for this. But veterinary professionals face alarming rates of suicide. Male veterinarians are 1.6 times, and female veterinarians 2.4 times more likely to die by suicide compared to the general population. 31% of veterinarians have experienced depressive episodes, and 17% have contemplated suicide. 1% have attempted it. So not just animals are harmed by our normalization of violence against animals. This, on the other hand, when we market violence against animals, it's celebrated and viewed as acceptable. So here's an example. This is a rodeo. These cowboys have to spur these horses and the horse falls over. And these cowboys make a lot of money doing this. There's also the Kentucky Derby. And you can see these jockeys start whipping their horses. And this is viewed as acceptable practice. But people are literally saying that this veterinarian who kicked this horse, which was not acceptable, deserves to be dead. The comments were absolutely horrifying, what people were saying about him. Look. And I just visited the live poultry markets throughout Queens, and there's an avian influenza outbreak in live poultry markets in Queens. And I filmed this because public health officials were telling these operations they should be wearing masks to protect all of these birds. When they come into these markets, not all of them are tested, but they're batch tested. But these are open markets exposed to wild birds, the public. This is out in the open. And this is what I saw at one market. So here's me walking up. So the workers aren't wearing masks. And I always worry about this. I felt a little guilty filming this because when activists expose footage like this, it's often the worker who gets blamed, and they usually punish the worker. Oh, you're handling this bird roughly. We're firing that worker. They're not wearing a mask. And then we can say, like, oh, everything's fine. We took care of the problem. And it's not, this was the same scene at multiple markets. It's not the worker, it's the system that demands this. These jobs require workers to perform this unnatural act of killing animals for hours a day, ignoring their instinct to empathize with other species. And that takes a toll. And studies show that people who kill for animals for hours each day suffer high rates of trauma, addiction, domestic abuse, and violence. But they've been led to believe that they're doing a difficult but necessary job. And they've probably been led to believe that the bird flu thing is overblown. They don't, there's a whole, thing against wearing masks. So it's hard to find workers to do these jobs too. So I don't want to condemn the workers for doing this, but it's the system that creates workers who do this sort of thing. And then we need to ask, why is the full force of outrage reserved for those we expose on video, while those who institutionalize harm are protected and rewarded? So at North Carolina State University, researchers conducted a study where birds are placed in boxes to see how long it will take them to die. It was funded by the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association with a $100,000 grant. and it happened at the Prestige Department of Poultry Science. That name comes from Prestige Farms, the largest pork and poultry producer in the country, one of the largest, and they donated $10 million to the school for the naming rights. And this is footage from a study they did on ventilation shutdown. Oops, let's try to play this. So this is these birds in these boxes where they pump in heat and they just see how long it takes these birds to die. So why are they doing this? It's because since 2022, we've had to kill 168 million birds due to the avian influenza outbreak. 7% of the entire US flock was exterminated in 1 month. US egg flock was exterminated in 1 month due to avian influenza. And they wanted to develop a more economic and efficient method of mass extermination. But what are the implications of legitimizing this method? Are we prioritizing economic interests over animal welfare? I think we all kind of take for granted that animal welfare, we've gained so much knowledge in animal welfare. Things are getting better for the animals, right? But that's actually not the case. I think a lot of things are getting much worse for animals. So are there less cruel ways to do this? And if so, why aren't we using them? Here is a list of less cruel methods. At the top is nitrogen gas or nitrogen foam. Nitrogen gas makes up 70% of the air we breathe. It's inert, doesn't cause pain or the sensation of air hunger like CO2, which is another method that is used. The birds lose consciousness in seconds. So why aren't we using this? Because the American Veterinary Medical Association allows for heat stroke-based killing to be used in constrained circumstances. And constrained circumstances aren't well defined. Simply failing to put plans in place to use less cruel methods could be a constrained circumstances. But why does the AVMA guidelines dictate how the government carries this out? Because the USDA pitched in $36,000 to write this document, the AVMA guidelines for the depopulation of animals, which would shape policy and give indemnity payments to producers whose birds were killed this way. It claims to prioritize humane depopulation, stating that while eliminating all pain and distress may not be possible, methods must ensure rapid unconsciousness or brain death. And in 2020, COVID-19 hit slaughterhouses so hard, so workers got sick, they had to stay home. Slaughterhouse capacity dropped by 45%. The pig industry runs in this just-in-time model where the pigs grow fast and they're sent to slaughter, and new piglets are always coming up behind them with nowhere to send these market-ready pigs because of the slaughterhouse bottleneck. Facilities tried to cut feed to slow growth. That wasn't working. And with no contingency plans in place, they resorted to sealing up buildings, turning up the heat, and waiting for the pigs inside to die. The industry knew that they needed legal protection from animal cruelty laws for what they were doing. This is an email we obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request. Liz Wagstrom of the National Pork Producers Council writes, I did suggest to our state execs to study animal cruelty laws to see if they would be liable to prosecution if they practice VSD or even mass euthanasia. This is another email we received. Dr. Harry Snelson, Executive Director of the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, commenting on the AVMA's statement about ventilation shutdown. He says, I agree, Lisa, it's wordy, but it's supportive of the situation. And I agree, coming from the AVMA, it's going to take a veterinary perspective rather than a producer perspective. And I think that's what you want for producers. It will provide the professional support for what we are likely going to have to do. And when activists released hours of audio and video recordings of the pigs screaming while they were dying of heat stroke at Iowa Selects Farms, the communications director, Jen Sorensen, assuaged public outrage by saying veterinarians and production and well-being professionals are overseeing the process to ensure accordance with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and the American Veterinary Medical Association. Many veterinarians were horrified that our profession was being used to legitimize mass killing by heat stroke. So we formed Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown. And over 2,000 veterinarians signed on. But standing up to powerful industries comes at a cost. And so what happens to the veterinarians who did speak out? This meme went around about me. I was banned from veterinary Facebook groups that I relied on to network and share information about cases. And it says, beware, Crystal Heath has an agenda that doesn't include anything positive for the profession. We recommend you block this person, Crystal Heath. And most veterinarians, when this sort of thing happens, suffer severe mental distress. They become less vocal about animal issues or end up leaving the profession quietly. That's likely what they were hoping for, but I'm lucky enough to have connections with the media. I told my journalist friend who works with Glenn Greenwald about this. And Glenn Greenwald won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting on the National Security Agency's surveillance programs based on the documents leaked by Edward Snowden. So he wrote this article in The Intercept detailing the retaliation that I faced. But despite this coming to light, I still, to this day, face backlash from the veterinary profession. And we got this email from the Animal Ag Alliance showing just how they fanned the flames of this pile-on that I experienced. It says, given her involvement with extreme activism, and I was not involved in anything extreme, I nearly writing words on the internet and advocating for animal protection legislation. We believe her intentions are to gather information she can use against the industry. We recommend spreading the word to your veterinary contacts in California using private member-only channels. 3 years later, me and half a dozen other veterinarians were barred from attending the AVMA's Cargill-sponsored Humane Endings Symposium. This story appeared in VIN News. And when Jennifer Fiala asked AVMA leadership why we were barred, they basically implied that because other anti-VSD activists had staged protests, that our presence posed some kind of threat. And they said, we don't want anything to hinder their ability to share information. We can't have people afraid to provide information because they're afraid they will be publicly targeted. We have not publicly targeted anyone, but I have been publicly targeted and suffered lost opportunities because of my position and advocacy. I was also barred from attending the AVMA's legislative fly-in. They sent this email saying, the issues we'll be talking about include legislation such as the Healthy Dog Importation Act, and participants in the fly-in will be focused on these particular issues versus the issues you care so passionately about, but actually care about the Dog Importation Act as well. And I was recently barred from speaking at the SAVMA Symposium. So that it just continues. And this is an Egg News article, blog by North Carolina State University poultry professor Simon Shane. And he says, Dr. Heath is virulently opposed to VSD and her writing suggests a streak of zealotry. He writes, characteristically, opponents of VSD can offer no practical alternative to depopulate flocks more quickly or humanely. And yes, I have alternatives, as we've discussed before. But he goes on to add, the threat of militant demonstrations has resulted in the executive of the American Veterinary Medical Association to advise attendees that the AVMA convention to avoid confrontation, to refrain from public statements, and to remove ID badges outside of the convention hotel. And he also writes, it is hoped that any protests directed against VSD at the AVMA convention will be muted and conducted in a civilized manner. Violence will only polarize the profession and will be counterproductive to the opponents of the procedure sanctioned as a last resort. So they're implying that I'm violent. And calling me a militant vegan and implying that I might be violent isn't just false, it's damaging and might lead one to think that I'm perhaps connected to this Bay Area Zizian death cult. I've never promoted violence. In fact, I've consistently spoken out against it and even disruptive protests. I believe if you kill humans, or even harm humans, you shouldn't consider yourself vegan because humans are animals too. The AVMA, Principles for Veterinary Medical Ethics states, a veterinarian should not make false or misleading statements that would defame or injure the professional standing or reputation of veterinarians. A veterinarian must be honest and fair in their relations with others, and they should not engage in fraud, misrepresentation, or deceit. But it seems AVMA leadership is doing that against me. A veterinarian has an ethical responsibility to report suspected animal cruelty or abuse. That's what I was doing. Humans, animals, and the environment are inextricably linked, and veterinarians should support collaborative efforts to obtain optimal health for all three. But recently, the AVMA adopted their new Principles of Veterinary Medical Ethics, which states that depopulation, if done in accordance with the AVMA guidelines for the depopulation of animals, is considered an ethical veterinary procedure. One AVMA leader said in a public forum in response to my post about VSD that mass poultry depopulation by ventilation shutdown in combination with a secondary method is considered humane and fully supported by hundreds of veterinarians who worked on this reference committee. But a recent poll on the Veterinary Information Network of 3,059 veterinarians showed that only 1.1% believe that VSD is an ethical and humane method of depopulation. 23.5% believe it's neither ethical nor humane, but maybe sometimes necessary. And 42.2% believe it is neither ethical nor humane and don't believe there is ever a valid reason for its use. More than a year later went by with no change, and VSD was now being widely used to depopulate poultry flocks due to avian influenza. Veterinarians submitted another petition to the House of Delegates in the interim, asking them to reclassify heat stroke as not recommended. This petition was not allowed to be heard at all. And at the next meeting, they actually changed the House of Delegates manual to not allow any future petitions like ours to go forward. And I spoke to some members of the House of Delegates who were not even aware that this change happened. And this is Sia Johnson, the director of the AVMA's Animal Welfare Division, speaking at a June 2022 Animal Mortality Management Conference. So let's see what she says. I don't know if you can hear that. You know how to turn up the volume? Nope, that's all right. Well, maybe we'll just try to listen closely.
If it's unpublished data, the panel needs it. Some of these methods are at risk of leading.
Let me start over again.
Emphasis on for this room, since I feel you're a little more friendly of an audience than I've had the opportunity to present for over the past couple of years, is we need data from you. And I know that we've seen some presented here. Even if it's not published, if it's a case report, if it's proprietary data, if it's unpublished data, the panel needs it. Some of these methods are at risk of leaving the guidelines. I think you probably have an idea of what those methods might be. We need data to support them staying in the document. So if you have questions about that and how AVMA handles some of that data when it's unpublished, and I have been involved in the handling of some of that data, I'm happy to speak with you about it. Mike Murphy, Warren Hess are down here as well, and while they don't provide direct support to the panels, they are well acquainted with AVMA's processes. Another item I would like.
So she's talking about cherry picking data to support leaving ventilation shutdown in the guidelines. And the AVMA just published their new draft of the guidelines for the depopulation of animals. They did not include any of the published papers that were critical of ventilation shutdown in those new guidelines. So is this really how a scientific body should work, where you're cherry picking data to support your agenda? So some people argue that VSD is necessary to keep the price of food low. Is that true? Cal-Maine Foods is the nation's largest egg producer. Their stock price has more than doubled over the past year. Their quarterly sales skyrocketed one quarter, 718%. Their CEO makes over $1 million per year. And they had to resort to killing some of their birds during this avian influenza outbreak. They resorted to using VSD, even though they're a billion-dollar company and have the resources to use less cruel methods. And they received $44 million of our taxpayer money to bail them out while they're making record profits. So how much money are we talking about? We collected data on the top bailout recipients during this bird flu outbreak at usaspending.gov. The biggest recipient was Jennie-O Turkey Store. They received $120 million. Herbrooks Poultry Ranch came in second with $89 million, and Cal-Maine Foods came in third with $44 million. And now the current administration, while they're all talking about saving money and firing people, are increasing payments to these corporations from $7 an egg-laying hen up to $17 an egg-laying hen. And we received depopulation methods used at each of these depopulation events through Freedom of Information Act requests, and we were able to match the depopulations to the payment data to determine which companies used which depopulation methods. The largest bailout recipients were all the top 15 all used VSD to kill their birds. So these are huge companies that have the resources to put plans in place to use less cruel methods. Our research was featured in a story that appeared on the front page of the New York Times back in April of last year. And I just want to emphasize how this whole system works. It was a $100,000 industry-funded grant given to North Carolina State University, which was then used to legitimize VSD, put it in the AVMA's guidelines for the depopulation of animals so that the USDA can now give money back to the very producers who paid for that research in the first place. What could we be spending this money on if we weren't bailing out billion-dollar corporations? Well, everybody's seen the rising costs of veterinary care. It has skyrocketed in recent years. It makes working in a general practice veterinary clinic very stressful. People can't afford to care for their animals. But we spend $38 billion a year on veterinary care for animals. And we also spend $38 billion a year bailing out these corporations and subsidizing them. If we were to redirect that funding, we could provide publicly funded healthcare for all animals. And I work at a nonprofit clinic that does get some government support. We have 2 vets and we spay and neuter around 100 cats a day. It's super fun. We also whatever the cats need, enucleations, convenient injections, we give it to them. If we were to fund more clinics like that, we would solve the homeless animal problem. We could provide medical care for animals who needed it. Think about animal research, how many animals aren't getting the diagnostics they could be getting. If we, instead of funding vivarium-based research, we were to provide diagnostics. If you brought your dog or cat to a veterinary clinic and they were now part of a research study and we just do all the diagnostics they needed, what might we discover that way? And there's a lot of clinic-based research, new treatments for dogs and cats that come out of just veterinary clinic-based research instead of the vivarium-based research, which is keeping animals in cages and doing tests and knockout mice and all of that. So I think that's where we need to prioritize some of our funding, and we can both provide access to care and develop important scientific research that way. And now avian influenza has infected dairy cows. So why is the epicenter? So I'll go back to that slide here. So you'll see most of the cows infected are in California. California is the largest dairy state. Then there's Wisconsin, and New York is third. New York isn't even on this, hasn't even had any positive herds. I don't know if they're just not testing or if it just hasn't reached New York dairy herds yet. But why is California the epicenter of the outbreak in dairy cows? It's because California produces 20% of the nation's dairy, and it's all concentrated in Tulare County for the most part, the Central Valley. And you have dairies, huge mega dairies right next to mega poultry facilities. And it's been shown that the dairy facilities have spread this virus to poultry facilities. So why did this happen? So California didn't just allow dairy expansion, it incentivized it. So through the state's dairy digester program, millions were handed to these dairies to cover their manure lagoons with tarps to capture methane. And Frank Mitloehner, who teaches at UC Davis, where I went to school, and I'm quite familiar with Frank Mitloehner, he was there when I was there. He has the UC Davis Clear Center, which is really, if you got to look into it, it's just an industry PR campaign based in a university, because these corporations figured out it's better to have their top industry people in public universities lending legitimacy to the policies that they want. So he says that converting biogas to renewable natural gas is considered the most negative fuel type there is, and it's rewarded by California more aggressively than anything else. So dairies can earn more selling these low carbon fuel standard credits than they do by selling milk. So this is the heart of California's Central Valley. It didn't always used to be this patchwork of mega farms. This used to be a lake. This is Lake Paschi, the traditional homeland of the Tachi-Yucup tribe, the largest tribe in California. At its peak, it covered 512,000 acres, 800 square miles, twice the size of Lake Tahoe, the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. And for generations, this sustained the Tachi people. But then came agriculture, canals, and dams, and it drained the lake. And the water was rerouted to grow feed crops, and industrial animal agriculture came out of that. So the Tachi's resources vanished, their way of life vanished. So did the birds, the wild animals that once thrived there. And in its place are these rows of mega dairies and poultry facilities. But in 2023, heavy rains and record snowmelt brought water back to the lake. And this is what happened. The effects were devastating. It caused $20 billion in damage to the agriculture industry. And it was especially damaging, of course, for the confined animals that many drowned during this flooding. And now we have this massive avian influenza outbreak in the Central Valley. So it's almost like nature is telling us something. And we have seen this increase in infectious diseases because this is the infectious disease trap of animal-based protein production. As corporations work to increase demand for animal protein, industries clear more forests, opening the door to zoonotic spillovers from wildlife to humans. But at the same time, even if we wanted to conserve forests, intensification is needed to maintain our current levels of animal-based protein production. So now you have more intensive animal-based protein production, which houses thousands of stressed, genetically similar animals in close contact with humans, also creating the perfect environment for viruses to spill over from animals to humans, which we're seeing with this avian influenza outbreak. So it's a vicious cycle driven by profit. And so how does avian influenza jump species? Different species have different sialic acid receptors. Birds prefer the alpha-2,3 linked found in their intestines. Humans have the alpha-2,6 linked found in their respiratory tracts. Pigs have both, making them the perfect intermediates. They can be infected with both kinds of avian influenza viruses. And this leads to this reassortment. So influenza viruses have 8 strands of RNA. So when you have one cell infected with both kinds of viruses, the viruses can resort and swap genes. And And this can create a new strain of potentially pandemic potential that could spread from human to human. An example of this is the 2009 swine flu. And this pandemic resulted from a reassortment of avian, swine, and human flu viruses. Dairies are the perfect environment to transmit this flu to humans. H5N1 is found in high concentrations in the mammary glands of dairy cows. And in the milking parlor, you have aerosolized raw milk that can get into the eyes, and workers, rub their eyes. And we were told all along that these workers, these workers had mild conjunctivitis. But then this photo in the New England Journal of Medicine showed up, and this is not mild conjunctivitis. This is called subconjunctival hemorrhage. And we used to think that the outbreak in dairy cows was due to just this one spillover event from wild birds to cows, and it would spread from there. And now through more testing, we found at least 2 spillover events that happened, which just shows that this virus isn't going to burn itself out. And recently we found the genotype D11 in dairy cows. And John Corsland, who's a former USDA scientist, says, "I can't overemphasize what a big deal this is. This is truly an S show unfolding into a nightmare scenario. We have no idea how widespread this version of the virus already is in cattle herds." So this D11 genotype was previously found in a British Columbia teen who was severely ill and hospitalized for several weeks before recovering. This is what her radiograph looked like. This is severe pulmonary disease. She was placed on ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, which is a heart and lung bypass machine. And if human-to-human transmission of this became possible, we do not have enough ECMO machines to treat everybody who would need this. All this, when we can now make cow's milk, it's commercially available without cows. This is board cow milk made via precision fermentation. It's the exact same technology that we use to make insulin. Some people say, I'm worried about genetically modifying. I don't want to drink anything that's genetically modified and stuff. So this is basically E. coli produce the protein, the milk protein. And we're fine with injecting this into our bodies if it's insulin. But for some reason, we feel weird about drinking it when it's the exact same thing and it doesn't involve confining and killing lots of animals. And some say that if we did this, we could produce all the protein that humans need on planet Earth on an area the size of London. And now we can also make egg protein in potatoes. And this is a company that is now Polo starting to do this. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm wondering if you would purchase these products. What do you think? Let's see if this is. Let me pull this up here. So far, it looks pretty positive. Oh, and I wanted to add, would you purchase them if the cost was exactly the same? Cool. Let's see if that changes. And I want to ask, why would you be likely to purchase these products? And this is like a word cloud scenario. Cruelty-free, probably tastes the same. Sounds good. Space used to produce. Okay. Down with corporate scum, I like it. Why would you not be interested in purchasing? Oh, here, let me show the right. Actually, you can see this. You can see how to join this. Why would you not be interested in purchasing these products? Yeah, well, there's that. I just don't like no reason. Raise your own chickens. Cool. Like, wouldn't it be cool? You go to like a bakery and all of the baked goods are made with like, you know, animal-free ingredients. You don't have to worry. Where are we? Okay. Let me get this going. So, and a lot of people are saying, like, if we moved away from getting our protein from animals, then we would run out of land. That is absolutely not true, and that's just animal agriculture propaganda. 90% of all the soybeans we grow in the U.S. actually goes to animal feed. Sure, cows eat grass, and I think people believe that cows are just grazing on non-arable land. Not suitable for crop production, but 1/3 of our arable land goes to produce crops to feed livestock. Vast amounts of land are being used to grow alfalfa and silage crops to feed cows. Dairy cows cannot produce the amount of milk that they produce grazing on non-arable land. They have to be supplemented with crops that are harvested. At least the mass-produced dairy cows that, you know, are making the vast majority of milk that we drink. And this study found that a shift away from animal-based protein production would save us $7.3 trillion in production-related health burdens and ecosystem degradation. And recent work out of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health shows that by addressing the causes of infectious disease outbreaks, we can not only save billions of dollars, but lives as well. They say high-density livestock operations can serve as an opportune environment for spillover events from wild animals into livestock, or as incubators for pandemic influenza strains. Large pig and poultry farms are where genetic assortment needed to source pandemic influenza strains may most likely occur. This is Dr. Pat Basu, a veterinarian who is the former chief veterinarian at the Food Safety Inspection Service, and he's quoted as saying, "When it comes to power, no one dare stand up to the pork industry, not even the U.S. government." But shouldn't veterinarians dare stand up to them? And some vets are. This is Dr. Alice Brough. She's a former pig veterinarian who is speaking out about the pig industry. And I've attended several talks about climate change and sustainability at veterinary conferences, but there's always this assumption that demand for animal protein is increasing. There's nothing, so we have a duty to ensure that it's done well. But I think they neglect to point out that corporations are the ones that are increasing demand for animal protein. It's not that people inherently are demanding these products. We are forcing it upon them. And if people had an alternative that was as affordable, readily available, and tasted the same, they would choose that instead. And I'm sorry if this is going a little long. If you have to leave, don't. But this is as a result of our high rates of animal protein, we have to come up with ways to kill these animals, and it's often not better for them. In 1999, carbon dioxide was used to stun around 2% of all pigs. Today, around 90% of the 130 million pigs we kill in the US every year are killed in gas chambers, 90%. And these are hidden from view of inspectors. And Temple Grandin, if you know her, like renowned behaviorist, wanted to do a study where she placed cameras in the gas chambers to see the pigs' reactions to it. But the company shut her study down. Activists were able to record 16 hours of footage from inside a pig slaughterhouse gas chamber. And this is what they found. More than 100 veterinarians now have signed on saying this is not in alignment with the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. And sorry, this is horrifying footage, but this is what happens to the vast majority of pigs in the United States. This is how they are killed. So CO2 causes air hunger, it stings their mucous membranes, they have this panic sensation of that, you know, that feeling when you hold your breath and you like wanting to breathe, that's the CO2 building up in your blood. And now, as a result of this method of protein production, 60% of the biomass on Earth is farmed animals, only 4% are wild animals, 70% are farmed poultry, only 30% are wild birds, and we've lost 83% of our wild mammals and 50% of our plant species. So the historic model of the veterinary profession is with the man at the top, and really corporations should be at the top and women and other animals ranked below in order of their moral concern for us. But One Health teaches us that all life is interconnected. If we do something that hurts one species, we all suffer. Should the veterinary profession see to it that the interests of all species are protected? Researchers are now saying that we evolved the ability to empathize with other animals 100,000 years ago. When our survival depended on it, that made us strategic killers, but killers with emotional baggage. Seeing the suffering of animals weighs on us. What if we structured the world in alignment with our human nature to empathize with other animals? Speechwriter for John McCain and George Bush, Matthew Scully, who wrote Dominion, says, when you start with a necessary evil and then over time the necessity passes away, what's left? So this is our theory of change, question systems. I encourage you all to pursue a career in veterinary medicine to be part of that change. Yes? Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. And if you want to join our live streams, and you can, thank you. I'm sorry this went over and I don't want to make you late for class or anything. And we also have a Signal chat if you're interested in joining our Signal chat. Oops. But yeah, thank you all so much. I'm sorry, it's went long. Thank you. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And thank you for fans of Severance. You can check out our press at ouronor.org/press. And feel free to email me if you have any questions. But I'm also, if you're free to stay and have any questions, I'm down to answer any questions too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And please take